Hello everyone, and welcome to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast. I am Jeremy Graves, but I am not alone, because as per usual, I am joined by my good friend, Mr. Andy Hanley. Andy, how's it going today?
It's going well. It is a plague of me.
Ooh?
I'm trying to be topical.
No, fair. It was that moment of, wait a minute, you're a plague? I don't know how I feel about this, but...
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. You may agree by the end of this podcast. Who knows?
Exactly, right? Folks, today we are here to talk about the final 3 episodes in Season 1 of the Transformers G1 cartoon. That being episodes 14 through 16. And Andy, just to kind of start it right off the bat like we sort of do before we actually start talking about the episodes proper, quite an interesting mix of episodes, and I really liked them all for, I think, very different reasons. Just each one felt very unique in its own right, and they were just good fun to watch.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like these maybe aren't as strong for me as like either of the previous couple of batches that we've watched, barring maybe Plague of Insecticons, which, as I mentioned last time, is kind of one of my personal favourite episodes. But yeah, these are all pretty good, and like you say, they all kind of have their own thing going on. I did kind of realise watching this, I don't think I've ever watched Heavy Metal War before. Like, I think that's actually the first time that I've seen that particular episode, or I have very few memories of it, because that one was a surprisingly like, oh, this is all, barring some stuff that I feel like I know from the sticker album I had as a kid, this is all kind of new to me.
Yeah, we'll get onto that proper in a moment, that episode, but there was just a feeling where ironically, I think for me, Heavy Metal War was the most familiar out of all 3, because I vaguely remembered kind of the crux of the story involving how Megatron got to the fight, which we'll get to in a few moments. I kind of vaguely remembered that happening, but otherwise these were kind of pretty much just like blank to me in terms of what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, it's doubly weird that I don't remember Heavy Metal War, because that was one of the most kind of heavily released on VHS episodes. Like, that got multiple releases, mostly like mislabeled as Heavy Metal Wars, plural, but hey, what's an S between friends? But yeah, so it's kind of weird that I don't really recall anything about it. Of all, it's the only episode of this season where I've been like, oh, I don't really remember any of this.
It is funny sometimes when you go back and watch things, be it, cartoon, film, or something like that, but it is funny sometimes how just there's some things that you just totally forget after so long. But then there are other things when sometimes you just wonder, why do I remember that? It is wonderful how those details sometimes are just very, very different. Yeah,
certainly been having plenty of those moments watching this show, and it's often the little bits, like I can remember, big chunks of episodes, and there are little things like, oh yeah, this was a really cool thing I remember enjoying as a kid, but it had completely fallen out of my head.
And before we go any further, everybody, should make note that if you want to watch the episodes of the Transformers, we're watching them via the Hasbro Pulse YouTube channel. It's a completely 100% legal and completely free as well channel to watch on YouTube. All of the episodes of each season are on there, and that is how we have been watching the episodes, and will continue, most likely, we'll get to that at the end, to be watching the episodes of the Transformers. If you want to reach out to us on social media, we do have an Instagram and a Twitter. You can find us under the username @StarscreamsPod, and if you would feel so inclined and want to email us, you can do so on the email address starscreamsghostpod@gmail.com. So, Andy, you know what? Let's just get trucking along. I'm in the mood for it. Let's get right onto the first episode today. Episode 14 of Season 1, Heavy Metal War. And I'll be honest, Andy, when I saw the episode name was Heavy Metal War, I was expecting a guitar solo. I never got one. I was just waiting for it.
Yeah, this also feels like one of those titles that maybe doesn't particularly fit the actual thing. It feels like that was an episode title somebody wrote down and like, oh, that sounds really good, we'll use that, and they couldn't really figure out where to put it, so it ended up against this episode.
So, I'm not ready to take this on a tangent, might as well roll with it. Bad pun, but whatever. So, as far as you're aware, was a Season 2 of Transformers already greenlit while Season 1 was in production / airing, or not?
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure like what the timeline is of like how quickly season 2 came along after season 1. I mean, given the amount of episodes season 2 got, I would imagine at the very least they were really confident that there was going to be more of it. And I know why you're asking the question relating to this episode, but it's I suspect that they were at least given kind of a nod of like, yeah, you're probably safe that there's going to be a bunch more of this because the toys are flying off shelves. Because I mean, by this point, I guess, Transformers had become a thing, like, well and truly, so I imagine there wasn't too much danger of it just, like, going away after, like, 16 episodes.
Yeah, because partly the reason I mentioned the question was that you said, like, it's a really good title, but in the context of the episode, does it really fit? It kind of makes you wonder how all out for ideas, in terms of how much they threw into Season 1, did they have going into production, maybe thinking this might be a one and done.
Yeah. I mean, because I guess this stuff would maybe have been decided, before there was any kind of like certainty over a second season. I mean, I suspect it's maybe. I may be being harsh in that they actually put a lot of thought into this episode title. It's like, well, Megatron's metal and he's got all these powers, so he's heavy, and there's a war. But I mean, I don't know. That sounds like a stretch when I start saying it and it comes out of my brain. So yeah, maybe, who knows?
Or is the alternative, Andy, that old thing we've talked about where, was it that they wrote the episode and they suddenly went, oh, crap, I need a title. What the heck can I call it? Heavy Metal War.
Yeah, absolutely possible. Absolutely.
So, we begin the episode with a panning shot across a construction site that sees an energy disc, which we're told at the start is going to be tapping into the power of the Earth's magnetic field, providing all the heat and electricity needed. Suddenly, some green-coloured heavy-duty vehicles come towards the site, but there's confusion from the humans there because they didn't ask for any more, and then they notice no one is driving them. We then hear an ominous voice emanating from one of the green machines saying, quote, "Right, no one drives us, stupid human. We are the Constructicons. We drive ourselves," end quote. These machines proceed to use their muscle to steal not only the energy disc machine, but also a power converter too. And for good measure, just trash a bunch of the other vehicles that were there as well, because they can. We then see each of them transform, and the leader of this group makes it known that they have done what they intended to do. Now they're going to return to their leader, Megatron, confirming they are Decepticons. Then they fly away. We now cut to what we come to find out is a temporary cavern-style base for the Decepticons, and we learn here that it was Megatron that built the Constructicons. They return with the parts that they stole, and we are formally introduced to each of them. Scrapper, who is kind of more the leader of the pack, if you will, is a front-end loader. Scavenger is a power shovel. Mixmaster is a cement mixer. Longhaul a dump truck. Bone Cruncher a bulldozer. And Hook is a crane, which, kind of obvious given the name perhaps, but just to clarify. While the parts are being fitted into a device, that being the parts that were stolen I should say, they are being into a device that we can't see what the heck it is. Megatron is boasting, but Starscream, who, for a good couple of seconds here Andy, looked like Thundercracker, not sure if you noticed that was kind of weird, but either way, he makes a jibe about how, oh, you sounding so confident sounds very familiar, Megatron. But Megatron is very confident because his plan will, quote-unquote, allow me to strike at the Autobots through Prime's only weakness, his overdeveloped sense of honour, end quote. Let's talk about what we have seen so far, Andy. I completely forgot how the Constructicons just came to be in the context of the series. I loved this introduction to the Constructicons. It was such a cool, unexpected way of doing it. Just really slaps you in the face. And also establishes that they're not dumb either. Like, Scrapper has got a proper brain to him and whatnot on it. And I just love the introduction. And also, I forgot... in sort of thinking back through childhood Jeremy, I've always had an attachment to the Constructicons. And I'm pretty sure it's because the green and purple colour scheme just looks so damn cool. It always has, it always will. And I love this introduction to the Constructicons.
Yeah, I mean, the Constructicons are undoubtedly cool. Like in the Transformers world, they were like the first Gestalt as well. So like that was like, as a kid, that was like, what? They're robots and you make a bigger robot? Like nothing is cooler than that. Like, you know, who cares? One of them's a cement mixer. Like that's still awesome. Who, by the way, like probably has like I really love Mixmaster's weapon, that he just kind of like turns things to just goop with this particularly kind of goopy sound that accompanies it. Is like some really good Foley work as well. It's like, yeah, I'm 100% behind Mixmaster. The thing that I maybe don't like quite so much compared to what we've had in recent episodes is there's not really much of an origin story here, rather than just like, yeah, I made them from Megatron. Like, you know, you think about the Dinobot stuff and how it was a very, you know, there's an entire episode, 2 episodes dedicated basically to their creation in various forms. Then you know, you had kind of Skyfire on the other end of that, and we'll come to the Insecticons later, like who all get sort of kind of interesting sort of backstories, whereas this feels like a bit more of a phoned in, just like, how do we get these into the show? Megatron makes them. And then that's it. Like, there's no real kind of narrative behind the how or the why, which is kind of, you know, because the Constructicons are sort of interesting because they're the first, like, kind of road vehicle Decepticons as well. Like, you know, up to that point, they're all kind of, you know, planes and jets and other stuff compared to the Autobots that are almost all cars for some reason. And so, yeah, I do wish there was a bit more kind of deep lore to the Constructicons rather than just like, yep, here they are, we made them.
That is actually a very fair point, now that you've mentioned that. I was just so happy to see them, I didn't actually think about that element of it, I'll be honest. Though it does make me wonder, is there ever kind of, from what you know, is there ever like an elaboration of their origin in Season 2? Or is it just they're there?
I don't think so. I mean, their creation is a big part of like the comics lore, where basically I think like Shockwave creates him like using, you know, the creation matrix out of Optimus Prime's brain, and that's like a really big sort of moment, which, you know, again is kind of like an interesting thing because it's the big culmination of like this entire long story arc about, you know, the creation matrix. But no, I don't think the cartoon ever gets into it much. It's just like, they're here and there you go. And then, I mean, you know, once you get into the late seasons, they quickly get usurped by the other gestalts that they're trying to sell to kids anyway. So apart from in the movie where they make a big comeback again.
There you go. I was going to say, the old thing of a new toy is the new thing that you promote. At Autobot HQ, Ironhide picks up a signal that resembles that of a Decepticon-based antics, if you will. It kind of appears on his monitor on his screen. But suddenly, one appears in the sky, and it's only flipping Megatron himself, just gone to Autobot HQ on his lonesome. After some attacks from, like, Bumblebee, who suddenly looked like Cliffjumper for a moment. I don't know if you noticed that, but that was a weird colouring issue there. Wheeljack and Ironhide got involved, but Megatron makes it known he's simply there to talk. He says that this is a matter about Cybertron lore. Their war has gone on for millions of years, but now it is the time when the leaders must fight to end it. The loser and their party must exile themselves to deep space for all eternity, and the winner can go and stay wherever they please. Prime accepts this challenge, and Megatron's plan is already in motion. There was a wonderful line from Wheeljack, by the way, I want to make mention of in here, which was, there was a moment when he attacked Megatron, and he was like, let's see how he likes my new shock blast cannon. He fires it, and Megatron just, like, bats it back at him, and then his reaction to that being Wheeljack's, was simply saying, "That's a shock, all right."
Yeah. These episodes are good for, like, Wheeljack getting a taste of his own medicine and making a pithy quip, in fact, because, yeah, there's one a bit later on as well.
Back at Decepticon HQ, Scrapper's device is now complete, and it turns out it is a strength transfer machine. Megatron stands inside, and each Decepticon must contribute a power chip rectifier into the exchange furnace. Not a sentence I thought I'd ever be saying, but there you go. For the process to be completed. The general idea is that each Decepticon needs to give their chip into the machine. Megatron will get a power or more strength from that respective Decepticon. Basically just supercharging him leading up to this gladiatorial style fight with Optimus Prime. Starscream really doesn't want to like give his chip away because, quite frankly, he needs it. But he also, quote-unquote, raises a legal point that the Cybertron code states that the fight must be fought equally with no additional reinforcement, thus meaning that Megatron's power boost would be cheating. But Megatron doesn't care, he just wants to win by any means necessary. Megatron receives the power boost and now possesses seemingly all of the Decepticons' abilities and powers too. Andy, do you reckon Megatron could have built this before he built the Constructicons? Or did he build the Constructicons specifically to build a device like this? Because this feels like he might have been able to do it in an earlier story for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know. It does feel like that's kind of what they're angling towards, because they do sort of like posit the Constructicons as people who can construct things, and that maybe they have like an intellect for building complex systems that the Decepticons don't. But given that they built a space bridge, like, you know, not that long before, which to be fair did blow a bunch of stuff up before they actually got it right, so there is that. But yeah, my take on it was that, yeah, only the Constructicons could have done this, ergo they had to be created to create said device. And also, just as happenstance, it's also some toys that you should buy, kids.
There was the other element from my point of view where I just thought, you've got Shockwave on Cybertron. Like, he's pretty damn smart. But, no, like I say, I like the Constructicons. Why am I complaining? So, with the transfer complete, Starscream raises another point that Teletran 1 could very easily detect that there is deception going on and will alert Optimus Prime. But this is where Megatron's other element of his plan is now coming to light, because the Constructicons begin tunnel digging, with the destination ultimately being inside the Autobot control room, so that they can destroy Teletran 1 while everyone else is watching the battle between Megatron and Prime outside. Now, for context, we're led to believe at this point that the Autobots are completely unaware of the Constructicons' existence, hence why they wouldn't be out there watching the battle themselves. At Autobot HQ, Spike... I was gonna say Spoik, but that didn't come out right.
That's the Bristol version of Spike that you don't get to see in this show.
At Autobot HQ, Spike, Chip, and Sparkplug raise their concerns about this battle, but Prime believes it will be a fair fight given the Cybertronian lore involved. Silly Prime. Then they transform, and head out to a desert location, Andy. Once again, we get our weekly dose of desert location here. And there is an awkward transformation error moment, which I don't know if you noticed this, but when they arrived at the desert, everyone goes from being car to original form, if I just say. But for some reason, the animation of Ironhide was him transforming from, like, robot to car.
Well,
and then they cut to someone else, and then suddenly he's back to his normal form.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he got the wrong memo. And it was just like, what, you want me to be car mode? It's like, oh no, it's like that embarrassing thing, you know, when like people are marching and one guy just turns the wrong way. It's like, it's the Autobot version of that, I guess.
The Decepticons arrive, and Megatron is feeling... I feel saying the words very confident is an understatement. Like, this is like the most confident Megatron's ever been to this point. That's how I'm going to phrase this. And everyone takes their positions to watch on from the sidelines. Now, Andy, I need to point out what might be my favourite moment of the entire series so far.
I hope this is the moment that I think it is, because I was like, I really enjoyed this moment as well.
There is a wonderful moment when Soundwave is the prime focus on camera. He ejects the Ravage tape deck. Soundwave then sits down. During this time, Ravage is now transformed, and Soundwave pets Ravage.
Yeah,
it's the best.
I now want an entire like slice of life spin-off series that's just like Soundwave, but Ravage is just like his domestic pet, and he just like, you know, gets home late from work and Ravage is hungry, and, you know, has to clean out Ravage's litter tray, and, you know, just like Ravage just curls up on his lap and they watch TV or listen to a tape, maybe, I don't know.
And then Rumble complains he's hungry or something.
yeah, just living with the Soundwaves, our new Netflix original.
Living with the Soundwave. Someone has got to have done that somewhere. There's got to be a thing about that.
Yeah, if they haven't, we are available for pitches, so please get in touch.
And in our weekly dose of Autobots Learn Something About Human History, Chip said to Ironhide as they were approaching the area where the fight was going to take place, "Doesn't this remind you of the ancient gladiatorial combats from ancient Rome?" Ironhide responds with, "It would if I knew what you were talking about." To which then Chip then says, "It's Earth history, Ironhide. Skip it." The two combatants shake hands, and Megatron delivers the first blow simply just by throwing Optimus Prime like he was absolutely nothing at all. Prime is dumbfounded at the strength of Megatron. We see Megatron start to utilise abilities of his fellow comrades, including Starscream's cluster bombs and null ray, Rumble's earthquake-inducing ground stomps, and Skywarp's warping. Now, there's another big animation thing here, Andy. I don't know if you spotted it. Skywarp is talking to Starscream, kind of acknowledging, that's my ability he's using. But they both look like Starscream. Mm-hmm. It was almost like they were talking to a mirror. It was quite weird.
Yeah, but at this point in the series, I'm just feeling so sorry for the animators where they have 3 identical jets apart from their colour schemes, and, you know, whoever's doing the colouring of the cells, like, is supposed to know which one is which at any given point in time. Which one, they probably didn't care, really, because they were, you know, probably not being paid a whole lot. And B, you know, just this constant, like, well, there are 3 of this character in this scene, like, what's going on here? So, yeah, I'm now at the point of just, like, every time I see that, it's like, oh man, I feel bad for them. This was probably real rough, having, like, 3 identical characters on screen.
Yeah, and then also, like, they've got the ones on Cybertron as well, at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, too many jets. So, Megatron is just well and truly under control here. Things are not looking good for Prime. But meanwhile, while all this is going on, the Constructicons infiltrate underneath the Autobot base. They get to, like, the lava bit of the volcano where the ship is lodged in. That was the word I was thinking of. And randomly, I don't know if you heard this, but Scrapper tells Scrounge to be careful. I don't know who Scrounge is, but sure. Again, I'm not trying to have a go at the production element. It was just that thing when I'm watching on headphones and I'm just thinking, wait, did I hear that right? And after I've written down all the names, and it's like, I don't remember there being a Scrounge. I don't.
Yeah. It is weird when you look at some of these errors and kind of try to figure out, like, where they originated from and how they weren't fixed. It's and that is a particularly bizarre one. Like, I wonder whether that was supposed to be the name of one of the Constructicons originally, and they changed them late in the day, and somebody just didn't update that line on the script. Because Scrounge does sound like a good Constructicon name. Like, you know, if you're like a dump truck or whatever, like, you could totally be called Scrounge. But, and I swear there did end up being a Scrounge in Transformers. But again, basically any word is probably also a Transformer at this point, so...
Was there a Scourge later on in Transformers?
Yeah, Scourge is, you know, one of the what becomes of one of the Seeker Jets in the movies. So yeah, you've got Scourge and the Sweeps.
There we go. So I'm not totally losing it. Good. So anyway, they are directly underneath Teletran 1, but Teletran 1 has registered that there is a threat underneath the base. Back at the fight, Megatron is continuing to beat down Prime, now making use of both Reflector and Thundercracker's ability in the process. Prime is downed, and there are some fantastic animations at this point, Andy, of humans looking worried. It's arguably some of the best human animation that there has been in this entire show. It was quite a sight to behold.
Yeah, they were suitably shocked.
So that's actually where there's a commercial break in the show. So I'll finally give you a chance to talk. Any additional notes you wanted to bring up to that point? Anything I've not mentioned, or anything that stands out?
I mean, I think you pretty much covered it by saying silly Prime, because it's like, you know, this whole thing, I kind of get it from, like, the sort of the writer's point of view, is that this is a good episode for the pantomime, like, kids sitting at home being like, don't do it, he's gonna con you, like, he's gonna fool you, and then, like, Optimus Prime goes and does it. But, you know, it sort of, it just... The words deception and con are literally in their name. Like, why would you take that at face value and be like, oh, you just want a fair duel to, like, end this war? Great, yeah, I'll go for it. And then doubly so that nobody really notices, like, oh, Megatron has all these hidden powers that just happen to be the powers that the other Decepticons have got. How how odd that we didn't know this before. This is perfectly natural and normal. While Starscream is sitting on the sidelines going, that one was me, that was one of my powers. And you can just imagine the other Decepticons are just like, shut up, Starscream, they're not supposed to know.
It's just that thing of like, shut up.
Yeah, and he's just like there going, yep, that was one of mine. It's just like, it's nobody paying any attention to what's going on here. And then finally, I feel like, given that Laserbeak had like snuck into like into the Ark pretty much every episode of this series, I'm not sure why they had to send the Constructicons in to deal with Teletran 1, because they could have just sent Laserbeak or Buzzsaw, maybe. Just saying.
Frenzy? I mean, okay, to that though, I will say that given that in theory every Autobot and Decepticon had to be present for the fight, I think that was their justification.
Oh yeah, I will let them have that one. I'm just salty it wasn't Buzzsaw.
Which, in fairness, I'm about to ruin that theory in a few moments of what I'm going to be describing shortly, so we'll get to that as a thought. Everyone is in disbelief. Prime said he underestimated Megatron. The Autobots are just pissed off, quite frankly, and they are ready to fight the Decepticons, but Prime stops them and makes it clear that they will honour the Cybertronian law and comply with what has been said. They will leave the Earth and go into the far reaches of space. The Autobots roll out back to HQ. Prime is badly damaged and can barely transform. There is a cool moment, actually, as well, where... totally forgotten his name, but someone else takes the big truck element of Prime away from him.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, Huffer does.
Huffer, thank you. Yeah, that was just a really cool little moment there. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was really nice. It kind of made me think, like, I bet there were a bunch of kids like at home there, like, why does my Huffer not hook up to Optimus Prime's trailer? This sucks. It's like, that feels like a thing you should be able to do.
Yeah, or just at least have something that attaches on top to make it fit or something.
Yeah. I bet somebody has done that with like the new like third-party figures that come out these days. I bet there's a Huffer you can attach to Optimus Prime's trailer. But anyway, I digress.
Back underneath Teletran 1, the Constructicons have broken into the computer room, but Teletran makes a distress call to the Dinobots, who are still inside the Ark and are not present at the fight. Also, they're seemingly just having a nap, so fair play to them. This is what I was saying, Andy, about, I guess my theory's kind of gone out the window there, because why weren't the Dinobots there?
Who knows? You could argue maybe the Cybertronian law says that only like actual Cybertronians have to be at the duel, and the Dinobots are not because they were built on Earth, as are the Constructicons. So
fair point.
That's that. I should have been a writer for this show, because I've made a really good excuse for this plot contrivance.
So we get some great firefighting back and forth between the Dinobots and the Constructicons. Ultimately, the fight ends up outside. They break a big hole through the wall and whatnot. The Dinobots transform into dinosaur mode. They are whooping some butt. But then the Constructicons kind of round up next to each other and make it known we aren't done yet. And they transform into their vehicle mode, which they say is Phase 1. Then they shout Phase 2. And they combine to build an even bigger giant robot that we come to find out is named Devastator. And now, for the first time, we see that the Dinobots are overpowered and outmuscled in a big way. Prime's crew arrive, and they notice that the battle is going on, and they want to go and help the Dinobots, but Prime is very headstrong and going, nope, we must obey the Cybertronian law, we must pack up our bags and go, we cannot assist. To which, it was part of me that's thinking, Prime, mate, it's a small detour, you're still going home. You know what I mean? Like, this is just the way it goes. But just to focus on that for a second, because the Dinobots battle element, I really, really, really love the interaction between the Constructicons and the Dinobots, because like I say, it's the first time we've actually seen the Dinobots just being pummeled. And it was kind of nice to see them brought back down to Earth and know that the Decepticons have now got the ability to take them on. It was just a really cool visual.
Yeah, it's also a really nice kind of like sort of power level thing, because, you know, I mean, we talked in previous episodes about the Dinobots and how, like, you know, they kind of really up the ante in terms of sheer, like, brute force and power compared to, you know, even Optimus Prime. And so to have something that is giving them a rough time is like, that sort of moves the needle again back in the other direction of like, okay, the Decepticons have made something that's like potentially even stronger. And, Devastator, very good Transformer name, I will just say. And yeah, I again, like having little to no recollection of this episode, I forgot that this was a thing. And it's one of those little things that kind of makes Transformers the movie even more interesting again, because you kind of get a rematch of the Dinobots versus Constructicons in that, and it's like, oh, there was history here. Like, there's a proper feud now.
Long-term build to the story.
Yeah, exactly.
Inside the Ark, repairs are complete on Optimus Prime, and Chip reveals that he had Teletran do a scan of Prime's injuries, and what it demonstrated is that the injuries that Prime had, according to Teletran, had been caused by multiple Decepticons, i.e. an attack from Starscream, an attack from Rumble, for example. Everything now makes sense. Prime agrees that Megatron cheated, and it's time to fight back. Outside, the battle continues when a huge new Autobot appears before everyone. It turns out it's a hologram made by Hound. And Prime is able to separate the Constructicons with, as we've seen before, Andy, his ridiculously pinpoint accurate sniper rifle style shootings from his giant laser cannon. It was quite a moment. He manages to separate them. Ultimately, the Constructicons are forced back. The Dinobots are forcing them towards a ravine that has opened up where there's lava underneath. The Constructicons fall into the lava, and we don't see them again. I was very disappointed. At this point, the other Decepticons are now on the defensive, and I'm assuming because they've all given their abilities to Megatron, they're literally just so weak they can't fight back, because they really don't at all. And then they fall into the ravine as well, into the lava. Prime ultimately gets the final shot on Megatron, and he falls down into the fiery depths of the lava below. One assumes they are now melted, but no, they are not, because Megatron rises from the lava like something from Terminator, along those lines, and just kind of says, "I will be avenged." His trademark concluding line at the end of an episode. Again, really, really like this episode overall. I was very, very hurt when I saw the Constructicons fall into lava, because there was part of me that's thinking, wait, no, they're in Season 2, surely. This can't be over. You gotta be kidding me. And then, of course, I thought, oh, of course they're gonna survive lava, because Megatron's indestructible.
Yeah, and there's all of that closed, and kind of when you look back on it, then the episode as a whole, like, this feels like it was made as the season finale, because you have the big promise of like, hey, here's the war-ending duel between Megatron and Optimus Prime, which, by the way, I didn't mention earlier, like, the shot they have of Optimus Prime, like, when that whole duel is set up, he kind of has that, like, anime effect, like, shimmery eye thing that makes it look like he's crying. And I'm not sure whether that was deliberate or just an animator having some fun or trying to, like, make that shot look more interesting. But it's like, is Optimus okay? He seems kind of upset about this.
I mean, he's getting whooped by Megatron. He's like, he's never been this strong. What's happened to me? I'm losing it. I'm getting old.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like all of that, you suddenly kind of realize this feels like it was the big setup for kind of like a finale, because you could have again have left the series there as just like, yeah, and then they all sank into lava. It's all over. There's no more war between the Autobots and the Decepticons. But then yeah, like Megatron pops up and just kind of shouts Season 2, and off we go.
So overall, Andy, thoughts on Heavy Metal War? Enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has its strong points. Like, it's definitely one that has like big moments. The Constructicons obviously kind of steal quite a lot of the scene, but just seeing like super overpowered, I have all the powers Megatron fighting Optimus Prime is kind of pretty cool as well. So all of that stuff is pretty good. And then Soundwave Pets Ravage, which is fantastic and adorable. So
moment of the show.
It was worth it. Exactly.
Just for that. So from there, everyone, we're now going to move on to episode 15. The title being Fire on the Mountain. We begin the episode with Starscream and Thundercracker flying over a factory with two Autobots. Trailbreaker, who for a brief moment looks very, 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 very red, which is quite random. And I think it was Brawn, Andy, but correct me if I'm wrong on that, because I don't think they ever expressly said who it was that was also in the factory with them. But
yeah, I think it was Braun.
They are in pursuit, not that the Decepticons know it. They're on the hunt for strong steel girders. And we get a brief scuffle between the Autobots and Decepticons, but ultimately, Starscream, I think for the first time in the series at all, Andy, uses some chest rockets to blow up the place, giving him and Thundercracker a moment to escape for what they came for. Starscream having the great line when he shoots those rockets of, "That's what I call bringing the house down."
Yeah, I feel like that's a classic Transformers-esque quip there. I did enjoy it.
And then, of course, moments later, assuming it was Braun, I'm not talking space crazy, Braun says, "We're too late. The Steel Stealers are long gone." Which I laughed at. Trailbreaker then also then said, and I like this as well as an admission of something's gone bad, "Oh, hexagonal nuts.
Yeah,
We better roll back to headquarters."
I think we've had hexagonal nuts twice in this series now, so somebody clearly cottoned on to that and decided they liked it, so they reused it again.
At Autobot HQ, no one's got a clue what the Decepticons are up to, so they launch their little spy satellite, which we have not seen for a very long time, to be on the lookout for any trouble. We join Megatron, Soundwave, Skywarp, and Reflector at an Incan pyramid, with Soundwave saying that there is an Incan legend, and it appears to be true, because the pyramid they are on is on top of a shaft leading to the Earth's molten core. They blow a hole through the wall of the pyramid, and Megatron is optimistic that the rest of the legend that has been foretold is true, because it makes mention of a crystal of power. And it turns out it is true, because the crystal is there. In fact, it looks very similar to the green crystals that we saw in the Fire in the Sky episode, Andy, when they were in the Antarctic.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to... there are, crystals a go-go in this world, because we had, was it the diamond ruby? No, they were rubies, weren't they? They were diamond rubies of Burma, I think they were. But, yeah,
yes.
jewels aplenty that seemingly have a lot of power in Transformers.
I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm totally fine with that, personally. Megatron picks up this giant crystal, and a huge beam of light appears, which I believe is the Earth's molten core escaping, but not destroying anything. So I'm a little bit confused about that, but I won't question it. Up on top of the pyramid, Starscream and Thundercracker have made a quote-unquote weapon frame, using the steel that they had acquired earlier. They intend to harness the power of the Earth's fiery core using that crystal in the weapon frame, and I'm guessing the giant beam of light that was shooting up, having that in a particular position to harness said power. Meanwhile, because of all of that activity that was going on, the Autobot Sky Spy, I think it's meant to be called, picks up something in the Andes Mountains in Peru. However, Laserbeak has detected that they've been spotted, informs Megatron, and they decide to test their weapon frame by blowing the heck up that Sky Spy. There you go, I can't even say it right now. This causes an almighty explosion that worries the local residents in Peru. Megatron is happy with the power, but after some earlier jibes that I've not made mention of between Starscream and Thundercracker, more specifically Thundercracker claiming this steel that we're getting now from the opening scene, it's not going to be that strong, it won't hold up, but Starscream just being his usual boastful self, and it's like, I'm the leader, it will work! It turns out it did not work because the actual gun turret part melted, so they have to now acquire some new steel to make do with that. And despite Thundercracker warning Starscream about that possibility, Starscream blamed Thundercracker. Don't you just love people like that? And ultimately he gets punched by Megatron as a result. And then they proceed to head to a mining town to procure new metal. So Andy, the fact we're now in Peru, I kind of like this as a change of pace, like a slight change of direction. Like they're even going for legends and stuff now, which... it's another way to kind of tap into non-existent Earth history, I suppose. But it's just kind of cool to have... hang on, back up. It's something you alluded to before where we keep seeing, a desert. And getting to be, in Peru for a little bit. It was nice to just have a really big change of scenery.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I kind of like when it does it throughout this first season, because we had our, assault on a kind of Taj Mahal-esque kind of palace where they had, some energy... machine thing. I forget what it was.
It was in the Ultimate Doom, wasn't it? I think it was.
Yeah, but like, so you have that, you have Peru here, like, next episode we go, we go on the move again. We've had the Arctic Circle. I do like the fact that Transformers does, occasionally decide that not everything happens in the desert, and we go somewhere a bit different. And it's pretty decently done as well, because like there were definitely cartoons in this era that were way more hammy about kind of how they portrayed, like foreign countries as well. Like this is kind of maybe teetering a little bit on that, but it's actually pretty reasonable compared to some of them that is like a lot of silly accents, etc. But a change of scenery, change of pace is good. And again, it's also just a change of pace, having the goal of getting all of this energy not to be, the usual just, well, we'll use it and then go back to Cybertron. It's like, let's just make a sweet gun. And it's like, sure, I'm up for that.
It's so true. And in terms of talking about a change of scenery, Andy, back to the Arctic Circle we go, because Sideswipe and Wheeljack are jackhammering the icy surface because they're rescuing Skyfire. Only took them a couple episodes to do it. Who is thawed out from his deep freeze, but no time to celebrate because he is immediately told to go back to Autobot HQ, pick up Brawn and Windcharger, and go to the Andes Mountains. Now, Andy, before I carry on, I feel the need to point out something here. When it comes to production order, Fire in the Sky was like the 4th episode in production in theory, wasn't it? I think we talked about last time. I don't know what episode this is in production order. I'm curious to know how close or far away from from like the Ultimate Doom and that episode this is, because there could be some glaring continuity things there.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure this was like, 5 or 6 or something in the order, because like this was definitely, because as we mentioned at the time, like Skyfire's random appearance in the Ultimate Doom, this was the episode that was supposed to reintroduce him so that it made sense that he was there in the Ultimate Doom. It was supposed to slot in before that, and it is kind of weird how all over the place we are, because we've literally bounced off the kind of the season finale, the Decepticons are all in molten lava, to like, well, let's go to the Andes, and it's like, oh, okay, cool.
And also, I guess if you count what we were talking about in the last podcast, and the fact that the Ultimate Doom epilogue kind of feels like a season finale / season 2 opener.
Yeah.
In itself.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of definitely felt like it had its own kind of narrative going on. But like, I feel like Heavy Metal Wars very much had set the tone as like, that just feels like an absolute, season closing thing.
Mm. Cut to the Andes Mountains, and Skyfire has found Megatron's crew, but Megatron notices the traitor, quote-unquote, too. This leads Brawn and Windcharger engaging in combat with the Decepticons. I feel from the get-go, Andy, before this battle even began, there was no hope of them winning. I'm just saying. They are outgunned, overpowered, you name it. It's true, basically. Skyfire carries on towards where the energy signature is coming from to give the scan, but is then also rapidly called back because the two Autobots are just being outpowered and outgunned, quite frankly. But what this does lead to, though, is a cool moment. I think this was probably a little bit later on, so I might be jumping a bit too far forward, but it was kind of a stunt where I think it was Windcharger was driving really fast, Brawn was trying not to get shot by Megatron's cannon, and then he jumps on Windcharger. Windcharger drives off of a cliff, and then Skyfire catches him in midair. It was a cool little set piece, and kind of something you could imagine seeing in like an old school James Bond film or something.
Yeah, I that whole scene I think is really cool, like with Windcharger and Brawn, because like it sort of it sets up quite nicely, because you see them both like in Skyfire, like getting ready to kind of drop in. Brawn once again like MVP for having the best lines here. Like he says to Soundwave, "Wrong again, you dipstick tape deck," which is really good. And then he calls Starscream an airborne garbage bucket, which is a good like just sending out the bangers again and again. And then the man has the audacity to pick up Megatron's cannon and use it against him. Which is just I mean, again, like, I remember kid me thinking that was amazing, and grown up me also thinks that's really awesome. Like, Megatron drops his cannon, he's just like, just gonna shoot you with this, gonna see what this is like. And just, like, gets sent flying by, like, the recoil from it. which is also cool. Megatron just absolutely furious of just like, what the heck? You can't do that.
It's the equivalent of just someone going, how dare you?
Yeah. It's just kind of the ultimate insult of, just shooting him with his own cannon. And then, you get the whole kind of escape thing. So, that whole scene is just really great in all kinds of ways.
It's actually funny now you've mentioned that again, because for some reason I didn't have that part in my notes, but that happens 2 episodes in a row now, where Megatron gets shot by his own gun, because it happens in the next episode as well, not to be spoilery.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have thought that, he might maybe, stick it on a bit better, like in the morning. There must be some kind of like cannon glue or whatever, like all magnets that he needs to, to stick it on, because don't drop that thing, it's dangerous.
Just a bit more blue tack would have sorted it. Fine.
Yeah, exactly. Bit of super glue. Sort you out.
So, following the big stunt that I mentioned, they head back to Autobot HQ to get reinforcements. And by me saying reinforcements, I mean pretty much everyone is now heading to Peru. Upon arrival, Skyfire continues to head to the temple, though he's having a hard time sneaking around at the temple because he's so damn big and he's got to not be spotted by the Seeker jets. Now, Andy, speaking as a very tall man, as are you, I could relate to this so much.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, feels like you've got you've got Bumblebee, you've got all these mini-bots that you could have sent one of them, with Skyfire, or sent one of them, look, can you go do the sneak thing? But no, it's like, let's send the biggest Autobot and say, can you just sneak around and see what's going on there? It's like, that's, that's some more poor Autobot strategy in this episode, It's not, so they need some work on that.
Silly Prime. The rest of the Autobots head to a nearby mining town, which is where they have determined that Megatron and his crew are heading to. Upon arrival in said town, the Decepticons are raiding a factory I put raiding a factory for Asta. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that note was meant to be, so I'm just going to jump over that. And the Autobots make a surprise attack on the Decepticons. There's a great moment as well, once again. Oh, in fact, this is where it happens, Andy. The hand cannon thing with Brawn that you mentioned.
Oh, that was later on, was it? That makes sense.
So yeah, actually, I've written down here, he gets hold of the can cannon, actually fires at Megatron, and lands the shot on him too. Though order is quickly restored because Laserbeak just steals it back and then delivers it back to Megatron. Which I did like, that Laserbeak just went... There was the equivalent of just that moment, you could tell it's like, oh, I'll get it.
Yeah.
If only Laserbeak could actually talk. But an interesting note, though, is that the battle is also causing some potential life-threatening damage. Bumblebee and Spike save a young female civilian who nearly gets crushed by a giant falling metal structure, kind of like a power line-related thing. And while escaping an onslaught from Laserbeak, the young girl informs Spike, inside Bumblebee at this point, of the Crystal of Power. And he's like, the what? And she's like, I'll take you there, let's go. And they make for the temple. Back at the mining town, Megatron informs Skywarp via radio that he's created a steel alloy suitable for the weapon frame and tells him to leave Starscream and Thundercracker at the temple and come and collect it. Now, Starscream, if I say is less than impressed by this, Andy, I don't think that does justice to what Starscream said, because he just responds with simply going, quote unquote, "How dare you assign me to guard duty? I'm Starscream the Mighty!" Just... The thing I also forgot until recently, I can't remember if I mentioned this on the show or not, but occasionally I keep forgetting that Starscream's voice is also Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
So every time there's like a certain cadence of the way he says something, I'm just like, Cobra Commander. And it's perfect. Back with Spike and the young girl, who, by the way, do we actually find out what the girl's name is?
I feel like she maybe did introduce herself at some point, but yeah, I can't recall if she did or not, to be honest.
Okay, because I'm just going to say now, I don't have a name written down because I don't recall hearing it, so apologies if I've missed that, everybody. But back with Spike and the young girl, she shows that Spike and Bumblebee that there is a secret passage in the temple, but Soundwave gets wind of this and sends Ravage to pursue them. Meanwhile, Skyfire's attempts not to be spotted have more than gone awry because Thundercracker finds him climbing up some stairs in open broad daylight. Good job, mate. But he realises that if he offs Skyfire now, Starscream will likely take the credit for it. So now Thundercracker, after earlier what happened when it came to him being blamed for the gun malfunctioning, he's debating, if I let Skyfire destroy the gun, Starscream will get blamed. At which point Starscream notices that and is pretty much just going, "You traitor! How dare you!" And then they have a bit of a tiffy. Starscream fires at Thundercracker. Thundercracker ducks, and then Skyfire just gets hit in the chest. It's like, oh, mate, you've got to stop doing this. Like, you're not having much luck with not being hit by things at the moment.
Yeah.
So, we'll stop there for a second, because I think that a lot has happened there. Anything else you wanted to make note of with regards to those bits? This is just a really fun episode. It's something different, and there's just lots of great little moments in there.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the fact that this episode you kind of get Decepticon beef beyond the usual Starscream, like, you know, needling Megatron. Like, you kind of... Because throughout this season, we've sort of had, you know, Starscream kind of whining to various other Decepticons about Megatron, or about how he should be leader, and they're all just like, yeah, all right, mate, whatever. But, like, this time it's just like, him and Thundercracker, they're really, like... They're kind of like, you know, the nagging couple of this, where they just know how to get under each other's skin, and they're just like that back and forth. And it's kind of really enjoyable just to see that kind of like descent between them, and Megatron just having to be like, like, it's just like looking after kids, and like, you know, has to get Skywarp to be like, can you just look after them, make sure we don't get into another fight, because I've got to go do the shopping and I can't deal with this. And that whole thing, and then like, you know, Thundercracker kind of having that moment of like, I could really get my own back here and screw Starscream over, like, it's really enjoyable. So yeah, all of those machinations between those two characters is really great through this episode to kind of add a bit of colour commentary to all the other stuff going on.
And in terms of other colour commentary going on as well, I will make mention that after they have their little sort of tiffy, if you will, and Skyfire gets hit, Starscream basically says to Thundercracker, "Look, buddy, you better do exactly what I say, or I'm going to tell Megatron what you were going to do. I've got your number," pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, but he also calls Thundercracker a putrid traitor, which is a very, like, that's a very good word for this kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, that's some good language there, Starscream.
Back at the mining town, Skywarp has arrived and collects the alloy that Megatron mentioned, prompting a retreat by the Decepticons. But Megatron ain't done there. He just launches a giant laser blast into a nearby mountain, causing a flippin' big rock slide. At which point, the Autobots realise, we've got to save some humans, because there's a town below, and they pretty much just get rid of the rock slide instantly. They just fire some lasers, it's all like dissipated into tiny little rocks. We get a little cheering moment from people. Life moves on. Back in the temple, Spike and the young girl and Bumblebee are still heading through the secret pathway, unaware that they are being followed by Ravage. Inside, Skyfire, now coloured like Skywarp for about 5 seconds when they were carrying him. Again, like you were saying, Andy, I bet the animators were having a freaking like, what colour is he? moment.
Yeah, and they just saw Sky in the script somewhere. It's like, oh, I know that's the black one, right?
That's a good point, actually. I'd not thought of that. Fair point.
Yeah, it's like, they're probably, again, like, probably animated in Japan. They probably, like, recognize the word Sky in there. And it's like, yeah, we know what to do. We don't know what these other letters are, but this will be right?
Yeah, Skywarp's... At this point, Skywarp's carcass is just being dragged along by Starscream and Thundercracker. Megatron's crew arrive back, and Megatron is just loving the fact that he can potentially rewire Skyfire to actually be a proper Decepticon now, after his failed attempt to do it a few episodes ago at this point, in broadcast order. At this point, Spike and Co. arrive and immediately come across the downed Skyfire. We then go to the top of the temple, where the newly improved weapon frame is tested on a mountain with flawless results. Inside, Spike is doing what he can to repair Skyfire, and but even he admits the circuitry is way beyond him, so he can't really do much. At this point, Bumblebee is taken aback by the amount of energy being produced from that hole that was left by the crystal, where it was sat earlier. At which point, Ravage arrives, and Q having Ravage and Bumblebee having a bit of a tussle with each other. Prime's crew then arrive at the temple outside, at which point, and I want to note this, Andy, because I think it looked really freaking cool, it's dusk in where it's set, and it was just really cool to see like a sunset-style battle happening with Autobots and Decepticons. Really, really cool looking.
Yes, yeah. It's one of those nice little bits of variety, because like pretty much everything in this show tends to happen in broad daylight. You don't even really get much nighttime stuff here, but yeah, having a bit of dusk, slightly different colour scheme, it's always kind of interesting to see.
But Megatron is still on top of the temple, and he's now firing the weapon frame at them, and the Autobots realise that's a tough weapon. So there's now a firefight going on between both sides, but with them trying to avoid this giant new weapon that Megatron has got. Inside, Bumblebee is at his limit in terms of trying to handle Ravage, but somehow Spike has been able to restore Skyfire, and Skyfire does away with Ravage and heads into battle outside. We then go outside once again, and the Decepticons have still got the higher ground, but Brawn is making a last-ditch effort to try and get on top of the mountain after he's basically called out by Ironhide for being a chicken robot, I think was the phrase that was used. And so he just...
I think he's called a robot chicken, isn't he? Which is like a precursor to the series of the same name.
I wonder if that's actually where they got the name from.
I mean, probably not, but we can. I mean, last week we decided that, was it a Megadeth album is named after an episode of Transformers? So yeah. Why not? Why not?
There we go. So Brawn runs up, is able to get to Starscream, and basically pushes him into the back of Megatron, who's trying to fire the gun. So now the gun's gone all a bit skew-whiff in terms of its placement. Once again, all Starscream's fault. So Brawn and Starscream fall down a level, if you will, in the pyramid. And Ironhide, who has now at this point managed to get up top to fight Megatron, he is thrown down to Optimus Prime. And Megatron now has the weapon frame locked and ready to fire on Prime and Ironhide. Quote unquote from Megatron, "Kiss your Magnafusers goodbye, Autobots." I wanted to make use of that, Andy, because Magnafusers is a great word.
It is. It's very good.
This is when Skyfire comes in and destroys the weapon frame. Prime throws Megatron off the temple a very long way down. There was part of me that's just thinking, Megatron, you can fly. Just stop. You can stop this. You don't need to take a hit on the shoulders and the head. You can just stop this in midair. But he doesn't. And then he issues a retreat. And during this retreat, kind of following on from what you were saying, Andy, about the Decepticons having a bit of, beef with each other, Thundercracker just makes a really big jibe at both Megatron and Starscream as they're flying away, which I really, really liked. Him basically just going, well, that worked, didn't it? Just really, really good fun. To conclude the episode, back on top of the temple, Wheeljack is working on a device to quote-unquote help regulate the energy gusher emanating from the temple that will sit on top of the temple now that the crystal has been destroyed because the weapon frame that I mentioned got destroyed in the process of all the firefighting. You'll be happy to hear it works, and Wheeljack's happy it works as well. And then this actually leads to a pretty cool moment where all the Autobots are kind of on the side of the temple, kind of like they're driven up a little bit, and then they do like a bit of a light show to end it, and that's really cool. And the closing moments of the episode, Andy, are all the Autobots heading to the nearby town to take the young girl whose name we don't know back there, and there's a kind of random line of her saying something to the effect of, "I want Bumblebee to meet my brother, because I'm sure they'll get along."
Yeah, well, it's her brother's car, isn't it? More specifically.
Sorry, yeah, that's a crucial word there. Sorry.
Yeah, because I mean, back in the 80s, they didn't have Tinder, so the Autobots had to hook up with other cars, via the good old fashioned way. Which is I feel like this is a really good precursor to the kind of fare we can expect in season 2, from what I remember. But anyway.
So that concludes that episode, Andy. I talked a lot there before getting to the end of the episode. So any additional notes you wanted to throw in, or anything that really stood out to you?
Yeah, well, I noticed on my notes, having written early on, the Decepticons have built a cool gun. I did note towards the end, it's a cool gun. I do really like the design of that weapon is cool, and I don't know, I'm a big sucker for some like ridiculous super weapon, especially when it's so powerful that the barrel melts. So I definitely enjoyed that. Yeah, the light show thing that the Autobots do at the end is really cool. I'm not sure why they do it, but it's really cool. Was a little bit disappointed by Wheeljack's invention having been talked up like, oh, he's invented this crazy thing, will it work? When it's just like basically a metal sheet that goes over the top of the thing.
It's a bowl. That's what it was.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. And it does, there is like a cool kind of animation kind of effect to it as it gets put over that suggests there's some kind of technology involved as well, but it's like, mostly just looks like a bit of metal. But yeah, you know, it's a very Transformers end to the episode where you kind of think like Megatron's retreating a little bit quickly here. You know, you could probably turn the tide back with your cool gun if you wanted, but you've sort of, you know, you've given up a little too quickly there. But yeah, some good stuff to be had.
And also, I've got to say, now that you made it clear that it was like the young girl's brother's car, not just the young girl's brother, like I accidentally said, the animation of Bumblebee being excited about meeting this car was something else. Just like Bumblebee bouncing in excitement while driving along the road. It was quite funny.
Yeah, it's probably the most kind of like super deformed cartoony thing that this series has done to this point, because, you know, it's normally pretty kind of plays it straight, and this is kind of like that is the goofiest moment that I think we've had in this series thus far.
So there we go. Well, folks, what that now means is, Andy, we've got one more episode of the first season to talk about.
We do, and it's and as mentioned, like it's another one of my faves. So I'm excited that we've gotten to this one,
because the episode we are talking about, everybody, is episode 16, A Plague of Insecticons. The episode begins with us looking over a very dense jungle-like river location, with some people boating across it carrying supplies, like bags of flour or wheat, such things. Then our favourite narrator comes in and says the following. I can't do the voice, by the way, but just imagine it's like deep and low. On the tropical island of Bali lies an ancient and mysterious expanse of watery jungle known as Demon Swamp, where a strange new form of robot now stalks the unweary traveller. At that moment, we see a robotic bug peer out of the water and say, with quite a unique sound behind it as well, kind of a really weird sound effect, "Food approaches. And on top of that, the sound effect I mentioned, it kind of almost sounds like a radio wave or something on top of the voice. You might be able to describe it better than I can, Andy, but just instantly loved this first look at what is an Insecticon bug. Just a little preview. It's a wonderful moment and a wonderful intro.
Yeah, I absolutely love Shrapnel's voice, and I kind of rewatching this episode made me suspect. I think I said in the last episode that I loved the Insecticons and ended up owning a Shrapnel toy. Rewatching this episode made me pretty sure that the reason that I bought a Shrapnel toy was because of this episode. And so if you ever want an advert on how to make an episode of a cartoon that's going to make kids go out and buy a thing, for me, I guess it was this one. So well played, Hasbro and everyone involved with this for making my parents part with their money. I mean, I didn't pay for it, so well played.
We then see another robot appear behind them and go into the water next to them. Then we cut to one of the boatsmen who notices something in the water. All of a sudden, they are hurled up into the air inside their boat and then basically just chucked across to the side where there's some concrete. Another boat is then attacked, and the boatsman there is just asking, "What's happening?" And the robot responds by saying, "Welcome to Demon Swamp." Of the 3 boats, there was one that wasn't attacked, and they are making a hasty getaway because the other 2 people who are in the other boat, they've leapt onto that boat, and they just get away as fast as they freaking can. As the 2 robot bugs that we have seen are now chomping away on a bag of food, which is quite different because, why are they eating food? We'll get to that. There is a 3rd bug hanging about in a tree who is told that its meal is escaping, and then we get the line of, "In that case, I better hop to it." The flying bug robot then pursues the 3rd boat, and you're kind of thinking, alright, how is it going to attack it? Is it going to come alongside it? Is it going to scare them? No, it just dive bombs them, and this boat just explodes. It was a wonderful visual, to say the least. As the humans are escaping off of it, they decide that they need to radio for help, as they can't let it get to the farm that's nearby. The bugs stop eating. They realise there is more food on a farm. The farm is near. They must find the farm. We're then somewhat introduced to all the bugs, but just to set the record straight, as Andy mentioned, we have Shrapnel, who is the one that looks like a stag beetle. We have Bombshell, which I believe later Andy was renamed to something else in some other continuities, I think, in doing some of my research, but I'm not entirely sure. It might have been Hardshell or something along those lines.
Maybe, yeah. I guess maybe there came a time when using the word bomb in the title was not allowed. But yeah, in G1 he was always Bombshell to me.
And I've got noted here that Bombshell is a boll weevil.
Yeah,
which I don't really know what that is, to be honest. I'm not an insect guy. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds right. We'll go with that.
And Kickback is a grasshopper. And they all transform respectively and fly away. So let's just... I know we've talked a little bit about the start of the episode, but just this first bit of action from the Insecticons, kind of like what we were talking about with the Constructicons, and just how their opening introduction scene was really impactful and eye-catching. This, no pun intended because it involves a lot of water, this blows that out of the water. Much as I love the Constructicons, this introduction to the Insecticons and the amount of questions that it asks the viewer in that opening segment alone, it does such a wonderful job of introducing these guys and you just wanting to know more about them. And most of all, Andy, as you've alluded to with you getting the Shrapnel toy, they just look really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's really interesting because you get right from the get-go that they're different. Like, you know, we've every episode starts with the Decepticons trying to get energy, but it's all about, you know, storing that energy for a weapon or to get back to Cybertron or whatever. These guys are just hungry, and it's like, oh, like, what's the deal here? Like, this is completely like different and off kilter from everything else, like to the point it almost feels like its own sort of like weird Transformers continuity. It's like a sort of Beast Wars thing or something. But yeah, and yeah, all the character designs for the Insecticons are really great, and you know, we'll get on to what they do with the concept of kind of insect Decepticons later in the episode, but like, yeah, even from first impressions, they all have really cool character designs. I mean, the reason that I only owned a Shrapnel is that I could never find any of the other two anywhere in the UK. I'm not sure whether they were ever released or not. They maybe were somewhere where I wasn't. But I would happily have had definitely a Kickback. Like, Kickback's really cool, and like Bombshell's pretty nifty as well. So yeah, just like really kind of strong intro, absolutely.
At Autobot HQ, Spike and Sparkplug pick up an SOS distress call from Barley. And within this moment, Skyfire is there and basically just says, the Skyfire Exterminator Service will go and take out these bugs. Pretty much going to depart immediately, but then Bumblebee, Windcharger, Brawn and Spike all tag along as well. For reference, we also come to learn that a bunch of other Autobots, including Prime, Ironhide, Wheeljack, are elsewhere, so they're not actually at the Ark when this call actually happens. We then cut to the Decepticon Underwater HQ, feels like ages since we last saw that, where Laserbeak has reported that a giant insect robot sighting has been had in Barley to Megatron, and Soundwave and Thundercracker, with Megatron, immediately depart for Barley, and Ravage is then sent to investigate when they arrive at the Demon Swamp. And then they kind of follow Ravage like Ravage has caught a scent, and you get to see a couple of Decepticons just wading through a swamp, which is a really weird but uniquely cool visual. Ravage discovers the bug's home, which turns out to be a Decepticon escape module that launched seemingly prior to the events of the first episode of the Transformers series, More Than Meets the Eye. It's deduced that upon landing, their computers basically changed them, kind of like Teletran did for the Autobots and Decepticons during the More Than Meets the Eye trilogy at the beginning of the series, and adapted them for Earth, hence why they are now bugs, and hence why they can eat more organic material like the wheat and whatnot that I was alluding to a few moments ago. At that moment, we see the Insecticons arrive at the farm and begin munching on the crops in the field. Just to break that down a little bit, Andy, because I think there's a lot of detail in there that needs to be covered. You mentioned it earlier in this episode of the podcast about there being a bit more backstory to the Insecticons. It's a really simple storyline to explain why they've been on Earth, why does no one know they exist already. Just so many questions about a backstory, they are just answered so simply. Sometimes that's all you want in a story like that, and it makes complete sense.
Yeah, and again, it just kind of makes them sort of interesting because it's almost a surprise coming off the back of the Constructicons when you realize, like, oh wait, like Megatron, etc. know nothing about these guys. Like, they're literally just like, what? There's some robot insects that are like tearing the place up. Well, I guess we should go and look. And then you get that again. All it needs is just like that little kind of sprinkling of backstory of how they got there, and it's like, yeah, cool. Like you've tied up all the loose ends on that. It all makes sense. Great, and even the initial questions about them, just why are they just feeding? It's all kind of answered there in one fell swoop, and it's like, cool, great. This is good.
It's also just quite a nice change from the norm that you can actually have a Transformer eating organic material rather than just Energon.
Yeah. I mean, that's the part that it maybe doesn't explain about how they kind of like synthesize that stuff, because I mean, we see them eating all sorts. They're like a puppy that'll just like eat your socks basically at this point. So yeah, that kind of stuff is kind of interesting. I will say though, like how many Transformers are crashing on Earth? Like, I mean, it seems to be a pretty regular occurrence, that it's just all the time just coming down, just never mind raining cats and dogs. It's just like raining Transformers half the time.
Yeah, because I suppose going back to our last podcast when we talked about Skyfire's origin story, as it were, that was before, well, at the time, Earth was uncharted, I think they said. Obviously, Constructicons were made on Earth, Dinobots were made on Earth, and then it was just the Ark. But obviously, Starscream had been to Earth before as well. So yeah, it's like the Earth is clearly known and is a place to go. And it's also interesting. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, because I posited the question, like, on the last episode when we were asking about, like, Starscream just flying to Cybertron in his jet mode. It's like, wait, like, how far away is Cybertron? So, because I'm a sad person like that, I checked the tech specs of what his Mach speed is. And
amazing.
How far you could travel in, like, what was it, like 3 hours or 4 hours from that countdown device. And basically figured out that if that was correct, then Cybertron would be in our solar system because it would be like closer to us than Jupiter is. So, that doesn't add up at all. But maybe that does explain why there are constantly Transformers crashing on Earth. So there you go. There's some pointless information for people listening.
I mean, you say pointless, Andy. I don't.
I mean, that's 5 minutes of my time with the calculator I'll never get back. So.
We cut to a ravine where Prime, I think Sideswipe, Ironhide, Wheeljack, Cliffjumper, and Trailbreaker are stopped in their tracks quite literally by a village celebration of sorts, and they take a shortcut courtesy of Sideswipe, which leads them to a dead end. We cut back to the farm that I mentioned a few moments ago, where the villagers are in a massive panic because the Insecticons are there, trashing the place. They're eating anything they can see, they're destroying combine harvesters, and at that moment, Skyfire arrives, and the Insecticons have spotted them and immediately start attacking. They ain't fooling around, they just want to be rid of them. At this point, Kickback launches some Insectishells, I think they were called, and Shrapnel uses like a shrapnel grenade. No, sorry, that's not yet. Shrapnel then uses a clone beam to create an army of reinforcement Insecticons from the debris of a combine harvester. This is amazing.
Yeah, it's also doubly cool because, I mean, having kind of made fun of the Decepticons for getting, like, fooled by holograms so many times in this series, like, straight away the Autobots are like, oh, those are probably just holograms, like, it's probably nothing to worry about, and then they start getting fired on, like, wait, these are actually legit. Help. And it's like, yeah, it's a really cool moment because even you can't be sure, like, as the viewer, of like, yeah, maybe this is all like an optical illusion. That's the phrase that they use, like, oh, it's an optical illusion. And then you suddenly realize, like, no, you can, he's actually creating clones from these bits of combine harvester. I have no idea how that works, but that's pretty cool.
But it's just a really it's just a really cool, unique ability. Like, we haven't seen a Transformer be able to clone anything in any form.
Yeah.
And the fact it becomes a proper physical object, it adds a whole world of possibilities to this universe now.
Yeah, and it's the thing that I love about this episode and why I kind of like glommed onto it as a kid, because like when you go through this episode, you get a lot of cool, like the Insecticons have really cool abilities that are different from just your pew pew lasers. In fact, they don't really have much in the way of traditional weaponry. Like they just have like some very cool, like, you know, you could make an interesting video game out of these guys because they have like interesting sort of unique skill sets that they can kind of like use together or individually in really interesting ways. And so there are lots of bits of this episode where I'm just like, oh, that's just a really cool thing and a really interesting problem that the Autobots have to solve. And then the way that they solve those problems is the other part of it that kind of gets really interesting.
The Autobots are on the back foot. They enter a large crop field just to try and conceal themselves. But the Insecticons launch a shrapnel grenade to basically just cut the crops down to size. And then a repulsor beam from Windcharger provides a little bit of cover for the Autobots from all of this shrapnel going about the place. Skyfire, during all this commotion, has been damaged and is now unable to transform. As we pointed out now, Andy, Skyfire is not having a good time in this series. Just every episode he's in, he is injured to some degree. Maybe except the Ultimate Doom, I guess, but still, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, he's a big guy. I guess he's a big target. He's got a big hitbox in video game parlance.
And also, he made note as well that it was due to a blow from Kickback as well. It should be noted. At this moment, Megatron, Thundercracker, and Soundwave arrive, and immediately the Insecticons feel a sort of bond with them, and they're told, we're also made from, like, Decepticon technology. You know, we are the same. And then the Insecticons kind of effectively go, well, if you're like us, help us take them out. And the Decepticons, of course, oblige. And then we get a team up with the Insecticons and Decepticons. Back to the shortcut part of our story. Prime ultimately just drives through the tunnel that has been created, which makes me wonder, why didn't you just do that in the first place?
Yeah.
Oh, there's also another thought as well I have, but I might come to that in a second, after you.
Yeah, which I suspect is my thought, that, like, you know, Sideswipe's like, yeah, I can just, you know, like, dig through this is fine. And then everyone gets impatient and Optimus Prime breaks through, seemingly basically at the end, where he was like 99.9% of the way there, and Optimus Prime said, I'll show you how it's done, and then just pushes through the paper thin like bit of rock that's left behind and like breaks through that. It's like, I feel like you've kind of stolen his thunder there. Like, he would give him another 5 seconds and he would have broken through that. But anyway.
Well, okay, you know what? I've got another thought, but I'm going to come back to it because there's a very poignant moment when I can bring it up. I will come back to it. So now that Prime and crew are through the tunnel, they arrive at the location where their comrades are under fire from the Decepticons and Insecticons. We get a big firefight between all the sides, ultimately with the Decepticons and Insecticons making a bit of a retreat because they are now bound for an oil rig. After they have gone, Skyfire is repaired and is going to make a hasty catch-up with the enemy, but is warned by Prime that he needs to make sure to keep safe as they cannot help him while they are on the ground rolling about, as it were, because they seemingly can't fly. I'll come back to that. Soundwave realises very quickly that they are now not alone, and the Insecticons leave their clones with Megatron's crew while they go and take care of the enemy. I need to say this, Andy. That makes the clone ability even better. The fact they don't have to be near them to operate them? Amazing!
Yeah, it's almost to the point where you're just like, this is a bit OP. This is a little bit overpowered because, like, you could create a massive number of clones. I guess there's maybe a limit to how many he can create, but you know, it's the fact that you can just leave them to do anybody's bidding is like, that's pretty powerful. And like, this is decades before Naruto, so you know, it's
no shadow clones here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Also, shout out to Skyfire, and I can't remember which Insecticon it was that said it, but Skyfire said during this like little battle in the air, what I wouldn't give for a laser-powered fly swatter. To which the Insecticon responded with, swat this, you Autobot booby. Just wonderful line.
Yeah. There's a couple of good little back and forths between Autobots and Insecticons in this episode. There's another banger coming up later.
So Skyfire at this point is now in a 3-on-1 battle, not in his favour, to say the least. So the Autobots notice this on the ground, and Wheeljack, while admitting he is not a high-flying ace, takes to the sky, fires a bunch of missiles, and then hits the Insecticons that are just basically attached to Skyfire's wings. Now, Andy, let's back up a little bit. Optimus Prime and co. had to take a shortcut. Based on the events of More Than Meets the Eye, way back in episodes 1 to 3, the Autobots flew to an oil rig. Could they not have just flown?
Yeah, I mean that is the consistent problem that this show has with the Autobots, where they can fly when it's convenient and then can't when it's easier for them to be held up somewhere. I mean, there's maybe some kind of arguments about their flight range and how far they can fly or how fast they can fly, and maybe they thought the shortcut would be faster than doing it in the air. But yeah, there are definitely questions on a regular basis of like, why are you driving here?
The one thing I will say, though, is to kind of get around that, I did like the fact that Wheeljack openly admitted, look, I'm not a high-flying ace, but I'm going to try and help. So at least they admitted it's not something he can do easily.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely feels like an attempt to try and kind of like write that in such a way to be like, look, this is not an easy situation to deal with. But yeah, and that I believe is also where you get the other kind of like good ding dong between like Wheeljack and Kickback. I think it is where Wheeljack's like, I'll lend you a hand, and then Kickback's like, well, how about a foot, and just like kicks him to the ground.
So, going back to the episode, Megatron's crew arrive at the oil rig and begin filling Energon cubes. Back on the road, the Insecticons' latest plan is to use Shrapnel's override waves to take control of a couple of Autobots to wreak some havoc. It's specifically being that they're going to make a few of them just drive into their friends and to actually take control of their movement. Again, Andy, another ridiculously cool Insecticon move. They're so OP.
Yeah. Again, it's another like another reason why I was clearly probably already like tugging at like my mum's like sleeve, just being like, I need a shrapnel. I need the shrapnel toy. Where can we get the shrapnel toy? Because yeah, this is a really cool moment, and it's doubly cool for me because like, I was trying to remember why I sort of had fond memories of the whole shortcut thing that goes on there, but it's because and this whole episode you get a whole bunch of Sideswipe and Sunstreaker who they're cool, they're Lamborghini contacts, they're really cool cars, they're in their car mode all the time, they're a yellow and red car, like why would I not like that? And yeah, like having them kind of feature quite a bit, and then yeah, like the whole remote control thing of them like basically making them play chicken, and then even how that gets kind of like overturned is all just like a really cool like pseudo technology back and forth between the two sides that I really enjoyed.
Also should be noted that Trailbreaker is ultimately the one to cancel out the waves of shrapnel using some sort of sound waves of his own. Brawn has a tangle with an Insecticon in the air because Prime basically throws him like a football, which was a great moment. Yeah. But Brawn is literally just thrown away. He's falling down to the ground, but Skyfire catches him. We now go to the oil rig, and there are Energon cubes aplenty that have been filled up during all this time. The Insecticons arrived and quite frankly are impressed at how many Energon cubes have been made. And Megatron is just kind of standing by a wall. In a perfect world, he would have had a cigarette break, because that's what it looked like he was going to be having right there. And he just kind of said, go on.
I was gonna say, yeah, he's definitely just having his chill out moment. He's just like probably got some headphones in, listen to this podcast. Just like, hey, this is my lunch break. Like, don't bother me if anybody calls. I'm not here.
It's the most chill I've ever seen Megatron.
Yeah.
And he basically tells the Insecticons, hey, look, there's a big tanker over there. Why don't you go dig some holes in that and basically drink some oil, replenish yourselves. And the Insecticons are like, woo! And go over to it and just start guzzling down loads of oil. But it must be noted that while they're guzzling the oil, a lot of it's just kind of dripping out the side of the boat and is going into the ocean. That will become important in a few minutes. At this point, Skyfire arrives and knocks 2 of the Insecticons into the sea, but the third one, who I think was Shrapnel, tries to fire at Skyfire, and then the other Insecticons are basically like, "The heck are you doing? Do you know what's going to happen if you hit the oil, idiot?"
Yeah, which is particularly hypocritical on Bombshell's part, given that he was like breathing fire like literally 2 seconds before that. It's like, you know, you can't really throw stones in that glass house, Bombshell. You would probably do something even more dangerous just there.
The remaining Autobots arrive and a firefight begins, but the presence of the Insecticons isn't something the Autobots are used to. So they're hiding behind some crates, but the Insecticons, who are all in the ocean at this point, just kind of crawl out and sneak up on them on the little sort of dock pier thing that they're on. And they get surprised attack and end up in the oily water. Prime noting at this point, there is a potential inferno here. Thundercracker gives the Autobots a warm welcome, literally, by shooting some fire at them. And then the Autobots go underwater, and on the little sort of decking pier thing that Thundercracker is standing on, the Autobots basically just jump up underneath him and just push him up in the air in unison. It's a great little bit of animation, and then Thundercracker just falls into the fiery water. Just a great little moment there. It looked really cool.
Yeah, it is fantastic, and it's again, it's one of those really good like turnaround moments of Thundercracker's just like, yeah, I'm just gonna set you guys on fire, and it's like, oh no, now I'm in the fire. This has ended poorly for me. But
now the tanker is leaking oil, the tanker is still leaking oil, and the fire is getting closer to the tanker. Obviously, there is a problem here. In comes Ironhide to try and put out the fire, because I forget, Andy, how many abilities Ironhide has.
Yep. I mean, that chest cavity's got to have a lot of different liquids and like compounds in it, because he's got something for every occasion that he can spray to fix the problem. Apart from bug spray, apparently, because if he'd have had that, maybe he could have defeated the Insecticons.
There you go. See? It's the one thing Teletran didn't think of when he was doing all the 3D printing. Suddenly, a giant storm cloud arrives, and the Insecticons are very happy, because they have a plan. What they do is harness the power of a lightning bolt to basically supercharge them, kind of akin to what Megatron was doing in the last episode of just being a bit OP. And because the Insecticons aren't OP enough, they're now super overpowered, just to make it even better. And they're like firing like lightning rays, like they're doing like the equivalent of a fireball in like Street Fighter or something. It's stupid mental. It's great. Spike has a moment of genius though by telling the Autobots to remain transformed because their tires are rubber, therefore will earth them, so that the lightning bolts won't affect them. And what we now see, Andy, is potentially one of my favourite moments of the series once again, because we see, I want to say it was Wheeljack and Prime, effectively like rollerblading on a couple of Autobots to stay earthed while they were being hit. It was just a great visual. A little bit ludicrous, but wonderful.
Yeah. Again, this whole sequence of events is really cool because, when the storm comes in, again, it's a really good moment of the writers not showing their hand too early because, you see the Insecticons getting excited, like, that's great, we've won, that's it, job done. And, Megatron the Decepticons, what are you on about? It's just some storm clouds. That's not, what are you going to do, rain the Autobots to death? And they're like, no, just wait and see. And then, you get to see, them harnessing that, which is really cool. Again, you get a really good back and forth where, I think it's Shrapnel who just tastes the lightning to Wheeljack, and he just gets blown back and just says, "That tastes terrible." And that's a good comeback. So you get all of that, and then as a kid, this was how I learned about being earthed and about being insulated from electricity, and that rubber insulates you from electricity. And I was just I mean, I'm glad I didn't learn everything about science from Transformers because I would probably be pretty messed up. But this is one thing. I think maybe I maybe asked my parents, or my parents mentioned it while we were watching this episode. So I'm like, oh, that's actually a thing. That's for real. And I'm like, what? That's amazing. You could be shot at by Insecticons, and as long as you were in a car, you'd be fine. And so, like, that was, I was just very excited that like I learned something really cool, and also seen like Transformers do something really cool, which, as you say, kind of like culminates in this whole like weird rollerblading thing, which is just, yeah, that whole thing is just great. And it's also a really nice moment for Spike, who actually kind of, because usually in this show thus far, it's either been like Chip that has the bright ideas, or Spike is just kind of uses one of his superpowers in that moment to, like, you know, throw a rock or, like, you know, do whatever. But this was a really good just little moment of like brains from him of like, no, like, you know, which makes sense because, you know, he's kind of, well, I guess less so in this sort of in the cartoon continuity, but, you know, he's like he's a mechanic's son still, and so it's like, of course he'd understand and know about this stuff. So it's a good little Spike moment, and he doesn't really get many of those in season 1.
So now at this point, things are not going entirely well. So Megatron has a dastardly plan. He sets the tanker ablaze and just starts pushing it towards the refinery because it's still on top of the water. But Prime notices this, senses the ridiculous amount of impending danger, jumps in the water, and just stops it, effectively, and makes it sink. Which, good plan and bad plan, Prime, but think of the oil, just saying. Trailbreaker then interrupts the control beam for the Insecticon clones, which makes all the clones just dissipate in an instant. Suddenly, it's a heck of a lot more of a level playing field. Now, Megatron is really peed at this point. He's really pissed off. And so he's going to shoot from the sea to basically just at Trailbreaker or someone. Which then, like Aquaman, Optimus Prime appears out of the ocean, holding the tanker above his head, and just throws it at Megatron. Freaking great. So good.
I mean, yeah, again, like, totally see why I love this episode, because like almost every set piece moment is really cool in some shape or form, and yeah, just like Optimus Prime just throwing an entire oil tanker at Megatron is pretty up there as well.
Then, in one of the biggest and most interesting twists, I think, in the entire series so far, the Insecticons decide that Megatron is not a good ally, and that they're actually far better off just sorting themselves out like they have been. They've done it pretty well up till now. So they proceed just to go and start gnawing on all the Energon cubes that have been made, just basically taking a bunch for themselves, and then they just clear off when they're being attacked. And then the other Decepticons, Megatron is furious, as I mentioned at this point, because he's like, the heck? We befriended them. What the heck are you doing? And then they go after and chase them, and that's ultimately how this battle ends. Which I think is a really fun twist, Andy, in that there's almost a mini Decepticon civil war going on now. Or at the very least, if they're going to work together in the future, they're never going to be like proper tight buddy-buddy. It'll be like, this is business.
Yeah, and I like the way that the finale for the Insecticons is basically the equivalent of like taking a bite out of somebody else's meal and then leaving them the rest. And it's just like, there you go. I'm done now. But yeah. It's a good. It's a weird ending because in one way it's kind of. It's that typical Transformers thing where it has to be a little bit anticlimactic because you can't really have, you know, one side defeat the other completely, and, you know, you don't get to see, you know, what would have happened next with the Autobots fighting these guys, but it works pretty well as a way to close things off, and it's kind of entertaining to see the Decepticons, who were quite happy to have the Insecticons on board up to that moment, suddenly be like, hey, come back, you just ate all our energy on.
And then there's a little bit of a conversation that happens here, because the Autobots are kind of like, oh, good, the battle's over, you know, yay, but the war isn't done yet type thing. And then Spike says something, which the Autobots respond with, that's you talking like a real Autobot there. And then Wheeljack throws out a line about potentially, you know, making him some kind of Autobot body in the future, so he could be a car. And then Spike's sort of going, maybe when I'm old enough to drive.
Yeah,
and then there's like a big old chuckle at that point.
Yeah, or maybe you can do that for my son, he could have said, if he really wanted to foreshadow the events of Transformers the movie. But yeah, like this will be my final Timmy Mallet reference in this podcast. I promise. Because I have a vivid recollection, because the final lines of this episode is Wheeljack being at the back of that, like, maybe when I'm older, like, you've got yourself a deal. And I remember that then cutting to Timmy Mallet just aping that line and being like, you've got yourself a deal. And then whatever happened next in that. And I think, again, because I recorded this off of the TV, this episode, I just vividly recall that being the end of the episode of, like, Timmy Mallet just repeating Wheeljack's closing line.
So, and also in a weird sort of way, not to kind of spoil things for where things go next, this little conversation is a bit of foreshadowing for what occurs very early on in Season 2, if memory serves.
Yeah. I mean, I know one of the early Season 2 episodes is called Autobot Spike, so, yeah, like, I suspect, again, whether this was actual foreshadowing or somebody being like, actually, that's not a bad idea, or whether it's just completely coincidental, who knows? Maybe we will see when we watch that episode.
Exactly. So, Andy, let's sort of wrap up the Season 1 discussion, if you will. Start off with, let's talk about this episode first of all, and then just Season 1 as a whole. So, thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, it's still, like, one of my favourites. I think, you know, the Ultimate Doom is, like, my favourite as, like, an all-encompassing, really big, like, blockbuster story over multiple episodes. But if you gave me this entire season on, like, a box set or whatever and said, right, we've got 20 minutes, which episode are we going to watch? This would be the one that I'd pick, because it's really great, like, you know, in terms of the Insecticons. All of the set piece stuff is really good. It's a really smartly plotted out episode that has lots of cool ideas and abilities, and kind of the whole back and forth of, like, you know, the final battle is really good, and I feel like it's another one of the better animated episodes as well. Like, it sort of feels like it has a kind of energy to it and has some really cool kind of visual ideas to it at the same time. So yeah, I absolutely love this episode still. It's still great, and I need to drag out my shrapnel toy from my box of Transformers just for nostalgia's sake, having watched that.
This was really good fun, and the amount of set pieces that happen, like even just Prime throwing the freaking tanker at Megatron, in a weird way, I can understand why this is the finale episode. Because just from a set piece point of view, so much happens in this episode. And the way it leaves off, it does actually kind of, like I said, is there going to be like a little Decepticon Civil War type thing? It leaves a lot of stuff open-ended to where you'd want to come back next time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of, again, the nice thing about all these kind of shows is because every episode almost has to end in that way. You can see how they can, like, juggle the order around however they like, because it always kind of works. I mean, part of me wonders if part of this was just down to trying to time it against the release of the Insecticon toys or something, that they were maybe, you know, they came, because, you know, they certainly weren't in the initial batch of Transformers, so, you know, I wonder whether those are like, look, we've got to make this the last episode because that's when they'll be, you know, shipping. But yeah, it's a really great episode. So it was really nice to revisit this one.
So, buddy, Season 1 as a whole, what did you think watching it back? Because for you, obviously, it's a giant load of nostalgia for the season. For me, probably less so, because I sort of vaguely remember more of Season 2. But for you, how was it going back watching all of Season 1 over the past few weeks?
Yeah, it's really good. Like, I mean, for me, with all of that nostalgia and what have you, it holds up. Like, I suspect maybe if, you know, you came to it now, like, you know, probably if you sat a 6-year-old in front of this series now, I'm not sure it would, like, hit with them quite as well. But I think it's you know, it's really good. Like, none of its episodes are terrible, particularly. Like, you know, it has a few that are maybe a bit kind of basic, but, like, every episode sort of does what it sets out to do pretty nicely. And, you know, it has a lot of very good episodes in the midst of that. Like, you know, the Ultimate Doom is still really good. You know, this episode was great, and there are plenty of kind of pretty strong episodes that either have a lot of really good moments, or they're just generally good from a, like, story and kind of character perspective. So yeah, like, I feel like, you know, this first season as a whole, like, is a really good showcase of, like, a good 80s cartoon, and it really kind of, like, you know, hits all the points that it needs to. So yeah, it was good watching this again and being like, yeah, I'm still confident that this is a pretty good series. Like for all of its errors and the plot holes we can pick apart with it, like as a whole, as a good fun cartoon, it still works.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching this, and in a weird sort of way, I kind of wish we'd have watched it in the production order. Or in the continuity order, if I call it that, because there was just some glaring moments where, for me, it's not that it necessarily took me out of it, but it was just that kind of thing of, what? And it just sort of catches you off guard, and sometimes it just takes me out of it. It's a weird thing with me, but overall, really, really enjoyed this. I do have a clamouring for them to show more backstory, which I appreciate from what you said is something that is delved into more in the comics side of things, which I never read, so I'm not familiar with all those older comics. But I don't remember if any of that really happened in Season 2 or not. Obviously, there are more characters that come into play in Season 2. I know that much off the top of my head. But I do have a clamouring just to learn more backstory in this cartoon, kind of see how they would do it.
Yeah. I mean, I do remember that there are definitely some pretty deep stories in Season 2, like, there's stuff like the key to Vector Sigma and what have you that kind of, diverges massively from like what the comics set up as the sort of the origins of Cybertron, but it definitely goes, it heads to Cybertron a bit more, it does some stuff with that. But yeah, like it is nice when the cartoon touches on that as well. And again, it's sort of weird, even watching these episodes, some of the comparison points, because there's a relatively brief story arc in the Marvel comics where basically Optimus Prime and Megatron kind of do the dual thing that they do in Heavy Metal War, except it's all done within a video game, which is kind of like weirdly ahead of its time for like mid-80s, and that plays with a similar idea really interestingly, because at the end of that story, like, Optimus Prime knows that Megatron has cheated, but still accepts defeat because he does something within the game that endangers the NPCs in that game, basically. And he says, right, well, Megatron may have cheated to win, but I basically kind of, like, gave up part of what makes me an Autobot, therefore I lost. Which means he gets blown up and killed. And he dies in the comics, and they blast his body into space.
My God.
Which, yeah, like, the UK comics the comics in general did not mess around. And likewise, in a similar tone, like, the one thing that Bombshell doesn't get in this Plague of Insecticons episode that he gets in the comics, and I don't know whether, like, he comes back in the cartoon at all, is he has what are called Cerebro shells that are basically like the same as the Hypno chip that you see in episode 1, that he can use to like mind control people or Transformers, and it's particularly creepy in the comics because like he gets into insect mode, becomes tiny, and then basically like literally injects it under the skin, and there's some quite like gruesome, like kid me was not particularly impressed with that. But yeah, like, those are the kind of interesting things that the comics did that the cartoon doesn't, which also lands, like, there's one really smartly written story in the UK like comics continuity where Bombshell like mind control, I forget what the exact set of circumstances is, but Bombshell mind controls another Transformer, and I forget what the machinations are, but it basically leaves Ravage completely mindless. And it's just like, it's really like dark end where like Ravage is just like wrecked because like he has no mind, because I think he has some like weird mind control thing that he transfers into like Roller, which again, like one of the few times Roller appears in anything. And so like, yeah, like Ravage just ends up mindless, and that was another like mind-blowing moment for me as a kid of like, wow, this is dark. And then of course like Ravage comes back like 2 weeks later and it's like he's fine, but because it's like somebody probably had words of like, we still need to sell that toy, you realise you're gonna have to just like retcon this,
bring him back back.
Which is also, if I recall, the same story that has Ronald Reagan in it, as I mentioned in a previous episode. So it was all going on in that one.
My word. But you know what, mate? So, like I say, had great fun watching season 1. But next up, Andy, is Season 2. We have made it to the second season of the Transformers cartoon. And now I'm going to quickly dive into the internet and see... well, this is somewhat apt. The first 3 episodes of Season 2, which, hindsight being 2020, for those watching the YouTube version, I'm saying on screen Season 2, episodes 1 to 3. Andy, we should probably decide this now. Are we going to refer to the episodes continuing the numbering, so like 17 onwards? Or are we going to start just saying Season 2, episode 1 to 3? Like, how do we want to do this numbering?
I think we should probably do it as like Season 2, episodes 1 to 3, just for sanity's sake.
Good.
Good. And also my counter question is, are we only doing 1 to 3 because there's a 2-parter in there that is episodes 3 and 4?
Oh, I didn't realise that. I just by default went through. Oh.
Yeah. I think we might actually want to go to a 4-episode cadence for Season 2, because there are a few multi-part stories that we'll have to fit in there.
Well, I will change that graphic then, as it were. Yeah, we'll do 4 then. Let's make it 4. So we'll be doing episodes 1 to 4 of Season 2. And the names of the episodes, Andy, are as follows. Autobot Spike. The first one. Then The Immobilizer. Then Dinobot Island Part 1 and Part 2. I don't know why. I'm really excited about seeing Season 2 because it's the season that I have most memories of. And admittedly, it may not be that many memories in hindsight, but it's the season I have the most affinity with. So I'm looking forward to delving into that. And we should say, Andy, like, we both have heard things that there is potentially some real dross in Season 2. Like, we're not afraid of that. We're just going to cover it how we cover it and just see how things go. But we're going to do the whole season. That is the plan. We're going right the way through, and we've got... How many episodes are there in Season 2? I need to actually check this. Oh my god, there's 49 episodes in Season 2.
Yeah, it's almost the same length as a Gundam series, with just as much quality, I'm sure.
And just as many giant robots.
Yeah, I mean, definitely more giant robots, I'm going to say, than Gundam.
So there we go, folks. We'll be covering the first 4 episodes of Season 2 in our next episode. Andy, before we close out today, any additional notes you wanted to make mention of? Anything that just didn't come up in conversation that you wanted to impart on everybody?
No, I mean, I will state for the record, I am frightened about us watching all of Season 2 episodes. So, you know, just to put that out there. But no, it might be an interesting role reversal, because I feel like, barring a few episodes that I kind of caught VHS tapes of, I have not really seen any of Season 2, I don't think. And again, I may be misremembering, and I've seen more of it than I care to remember, but I am pretty sure I have only seen like a sparse few episodes here and there that I managed to find on tape, because this season was never broadcast on UK TV, as was Season 3. So kind of that's why Season 1 was my bread and butter, because it was right there with Timmy Mallet. Definitely my last mention of Timmy Mallet. But yeah, so if you like, from that point forth, it was kind of, unless, you know, you had the right, you know, it wasn't even Blockbuster at the time, but if you had the right video rental store, then maybe you'd get a lot of Transformers, but I feel like I never did in my neck of the woods, so I had to, you know, pilfer other lesser cartoons for my, like, weekend entertainment.
It makes me wonder, actually, I might have to ask my mother or something, but it makes me wonder how I have such strong memories of Season 2 then, if it was only released on VHS and not shown on TV.
Yeah.
Because that's what I remember, like, that's what I remember various things. Well, I don't necessarily know from what episodes, but I have many memories of Season 2. Like, specifically.
I would very much suspect that it's probably off of just, like, renting stuff from your local video rental store. Because a lot of the episodes got released in the UK over here because they weren't on broadcast TV. Like, they never really bothered with the Season 1 episodes for the most part, because they were just airing on TV constantly in rotation for years. Whereas the later seasons, it was kind of a better money-making opportunity, because it was the only way to see them. And I think some of them were even kind of, you know, sold that way, of just like, you know, previously unaired, and it was sort of, you know, your one and only chance to see those eps.
Yeah, before the days where you could just go online and watch them on YouTube, like we're doing on the Hasbro Pulse YouTube channel. So, folks, get in on the action. You can if you want to go back and rewatch season 1, go for it, and you can hear us talk about it again. And then get ready for season 2, because next time, as mentioned, we will be talking about the first 4 episodes of season 2. From my point of view, Andy, again, just really enjoyed going through season 1, and it's been really good fun doing it in this, like, just going through them. Actually, you know what, Andy? This is an important question we will end the episode on. Are we going by broadcast order for season 2, or do we want to go by production order?
No, I think we should stick with broadcast order. Let's start where we ended. I mean, the production order for season 2 is even more of a mess, because I think, like, episode 2 in production order is, like, way down, like, in the midst of the season. But I think there's far less kind of, you know, there are a few two-parters in there, but I think there's far less, well, we shall see, but I think there's far less continuity in these, so I don't think it'll be quite as weird, but, you know, maybe I'll regret saying that in a few episodes' time. We shall see.
Well, folks, thank you very much for checking out this edition of the podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch with us, don't forget that we are on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us at StarscreamsPod on both of those platforms, and you can drop us an email if you feel so inclined on starscreamsghostpod@gmail.com. Once again, thank you very much for listening and or watching if you're on YouTube this edition of the podcast. From myself, Jeremy Graves, from him, Mr. Andy Hanley, you've been listening to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast. Take care, and we'll speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.